Dr. O'Hare is a demographer whose work over the past 30 years has been defined by the use of statistical data to elevate the needs of disadvantaged populations, such as children, the poor, and racial minorities on the public agenda. Dr. O'Hare has been involved in decennial census issues since the late 1970s. As the director of the National Kids Count program at the Casey Foundation from 1993 to 2006, she used data from the Census Bureau on a regular basis. We welcome Dr. Bill O'Hare. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
To get us started with the conversation, Dr. O'Hare, could you tell us how is it that we know that children are being undercounted?
Well, I'll start by saying it's been documented for a long time, so the recent findings about the undercounted children are not new. And let me just mention that the report that you alluded to earlier that I produced in December is available on our website, and that's www.kidscount.org. So I may repeat that later on again for your listeners, but if you go to that website, it's prominently featured there, and it has more detail than I can go into today. There's a couple of ways in which the Census Bureau and demographers in general assess whether people have been missed or not in the census. The simplest, most straightforward one is called demographic analysis, but it's really pretty simple, that if you know how many black males are born in 1995, you know how many one-year-old black males die in 96 and how many 2-year-olds die in 97, so on and so forth. You know how many black 5-year-old males you should get in the 2000 census. If you carry that forward to other groups, that's a common way in which the census is assessed, by looking at an independent estimate and seeing whether it looks reasonable or not. And that's the primary method that I use in looking at this data. The other method that doesn't typically work so well, in my opinion, is it's called dual system estimates. But the point is that a few months after the census is taken, the Census Bureau selects a small group of blocks around the country, and they go in with their best interviewers and put more resources into that and try and get a better census, if you will, of what people who were living in those households in April 1st of 2000. Then they compare their census count to this hopefully better count that they got in the follow-up. There's some problems with that, but the point is those are the two methods that the Census Bureau uses to assess how well they've counted the population.
What does the data tell us about the undercount of children, specifically 0 to 5?
Well, as I said earlier, children have been missed for a long time, but in 2000, as you look at the results of that demographic analysis, it is very clear that young children are missed at a higher rate than any other age group. By young children, I mean under age 5. About 750,000 people in that age group were missed, and that amounts to about 4% of that population. That's much higher than most other age groups. Interestingly, kind of the lower down you go in the age spectrum, the higher the undercount rate. About 5% of newborns under age 1 were missed in the census. So there's a high undercount of the preschoolers, a somewhat less undercount of the 5 to 9-year-olds, but still an undercount there. But I think the big issue, if you look at the results of the data, is this group of kids who are under 5 years old who are missed disproportionately.
It sounds like what you're saying is the younger you get, the more likely it may be that you may not be counted.
That seems to be the way the data makes that very clear. If you look at, for example, 10, 9, 8, 7, so on, there's a very clear trend that the younger kids are missed more often than even 8 and 9-year-olds.
Is this trend happen across all groups in terms of children, ethnic groups, or is there specific groups that are undercounted the most?
Well, we really don't have very good data in that. The data we have indicates that black children are missed more often than white children, and I suspect, and most other demographers I know think that it's probably other minorities who are typically missed more often in the census. Hispanics, American Indians, for example, are probably overrepresented in young children being missed. And I should mention that there's probably, I think, an overlay of poverty in that. One of the reasons that those groups are missed is because they tend to have higher poverty rates, and I suspect the kids who are missed most often are not only likely to be a minority group, but also more likely to be poor.
So, that takes us to discussing why are they undercounted. what does the data and your experience tell us about why are children 0 to 5 undercounted at such higher rates than other groups?
Well, it's an excellent question, and I wished I had better answers, and I wish the Census Bureau had better answers. Even though this has been going on for a long time, there has been virtually no studies of this based on census data. But there's a couple of ideas that are kind of floating around that people have voiced from time to time, and that's about as good as I can do. One is that, and the data kind of support this, is that young children often live in the kind of households that are hard to count. Their families move around more. They may be renters rather than homeowners, have a higher poverty rate. They have some of the characteristics that make the population in general harder to count. So that's one idea, that young children are a little more concentrated in the kinds of populations and households that are hard to count in any respect. The other idea that seems to be reasonable is that in the census form, there's only room for complete information for 6 people. And then if a household has more than 6 people, there's a way that the Bureau has of going back to the household to try and get that information on the 7th, 8th, and 9th, and 10th person in the household at a later date. And we know from a lot of research at the Bureau that more often than not, people fill out these kinds of household rosters from the oldest to the youngest person. So if they're going down the list and they stop before they finish, the youngest persons are the one that typically get left off the list. And we know also that young people under age 5 are much more likely to live in large households. By that I mean more than 6 people in the household. Something on the order of 8 or 9% of young children live in large households compared to only about 2% of the overall population. So because of the way the form is designed, I think children are much more likely to be left off the census than other groups.
I know that they made some changes to the form for this time around, for the 2010. Did they do anything new to the form that might help, close the gap in that undercount for the children 0 to 5?
I think so. They made some changes, and we'll see how much impact they have. But one of the things that they did, let me back up. In the 2000 census, what people were asked to do is list all the information for the first 6 people in the household, and then just give the name of the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th person, and so on. In the 2010 census, they're asked not only the name of that person, but also the gender and the age. So if the Census Bureau isn't able to get back and secure more information, at least they have the age of that person on the form. So that's likely to help out some.
Great. Talking about mobile families, can you tell us a little bit more about what is it that, based on your experience, what are those conditions, those conditions of those households to make it difficult to count children? If you can expand a little bit more on that.
Well, there's a couple of things. I think one is you can imagine that if people are moving from household to household about the time of the census, they may get the form and then they're packing up and they just throw it out and they don't get a form at their new household. So just the moving around has some impact on that. The other part of it, I think, that is worth noting is that a lot of households that tend to move a lot tend to be low-income households, and those families have a lot of pressures on them, a lot of things to keep track of, a lot of things to do other than fill out a census form. So I suspect the fact that those households have more pressures on a variety of things, of trying to get a job, trying to get to work, trying to get the kids taken care of, that the census form just doesn't have the same kind of urgency that it may have in some other households.
Are you hopeful that in the 2010 the undercount might be less?
I'm certainly hopeful. I'm not sure if I'm optimistic or not. That there's, I think, 2 things going on. One, I think the Bureau is trying harder. I think things like this call, and there has been a much bigger movement this time around amongst people in the child advocacy community. On the other hand, I think some of the demographic changes are likely to make it more difficult, that there's more kids living in households that don't speak English as a first language, more living in households with undocumented people in the household, more poverty. So there's a lot of other trends. I guess the housing situation around the country, I think in California, particularly in California, where people are doubling up or unsure about where they're going to live next month and unsure about who to include in their household on April 1st.
Correct. Can we quantify the impact of that undercount in terms of resources? What is it that communities are missing when there's an undercount?
Well, it can't quantify it very precisely, but we can get down to some pretty good numbers, or pretty decent numbers, I guess. And first, let me add that the important thing to note is that children, and particularly minority children, are not spread evenly across the country. They're more concentrated in some communities than others. And when you look at the undercount in the census, it's the undercount of those communities, which is really the problematic situation. But there's a report that's going to be released tomorrow by the Brookings Institute that shows about $447 billion was distributed in 2008, based at least in part on census figures. So if a community is not counted completely, they won't get their fair share of those economic resources, not to mention the political resources they won't get their fair share of and other things. But let me just list a couple of these programs that will probably resonate with some of your listeners. The medical assistance program in Medicaid gives about $260 billion each year, based in part on census data. Special education grants to states, $11 billion. Title I, $7.5 billion. State child insurance program, it's the health insurance program, $7 billion. That's gone up since these figures were reported. So there's a number of programs where the federal government provides states and localities with money based in part on the number of people and often on the number of people in need. So if those people are not captured in the census data, those communities will not get their fair share of money.
Great. Based on the research document, what are the recommendations you kind of reached in terms of how we can address that undercount of children 0 to 5?
Well, there's a number of things that I point out in there. I mean, I think the key is trying to figure out what kind of systems, what kind of groups typically reach households with young children on a regular basis. And when you think about it that way, obviously child care, Head Start, pediatricians, the Women, Infants, and Children program, some of the foster care programs, education in general, even elementary school, because quite often people kids who are in elementary school have a younger sibling at home. So my recommendation was for the Census Bureau and advocates and state and local government who all have a stake in this to try and use those systems to reach out to parents to underscore the importance that each child should be counted in the census. Every child should be counted in the census.
Most of the participants in today's call are from nonprofits that are working with parents or with children 0 to 5, or parents of children 0 to 5. Any specific recommendations for nonprofits that you think could help in being able to address that undercount?
Well, a couple of things that I would suggest, broad things. I guess one is to use whatever access you have to leadership groups of mayors and city councils and newspapers and school superintendents to tell them how important it is for them to relay the message that the census is important and that it's safe and that it's easy. Those are the three key messages the Bureau is putting out. But obviously, those from the Bureau to the ears of a lot of the people in low-income neighborhoods, or neighborhoods in general, takes some trusted voices in the neighborhood to make that meaningful. So reaching out to those groups is one thing. And the other is trying to use whatever resources one has to facilitate census to make it easier to get the information out to folks. Put up posters in storefronts or community centers or schools. There is a Census in Schools program that the Census Bureau runs. So if you're at a school, ask the superintendent, principal, or teacher if they're doing something on that. There's some free documents that can be downloaded from the census to do that Census in Schools work. So those are the kinds of things I would suggest. I also just mentioned, I know we work a lot with the National Association of Latino Elected Officials, who are making a big push with their membership to get Census in Schools into all the schools where there are Latino school board members.
I know we've covered a lot of information in just about 10 minutes. Anything else you would like to share about the report and highlight from your report to the participants in today's call?
Well, let me do two things. I'll go back over the website again where that report is available is www.kidscount.org. And I'll also make a couple other kind of broader recommendations or suggestions, I guess, that to add your voice to the choir, as they say, because there's a lot of stuff ongoing now, but many of it is from a broader perspective and doesn't necessarily include the interest of children, particularly young children. For example, most major cities in every state has a complete count census committee. If you're able to join that committee, you can take the interest of children with you and make sure whatever outreach they're doing, they're spending some time and effort to reach the households with young children. There also is an event tomorrow that's going to be available on the web, I guess, from the Census Bureau, who have, for the first time ever, launched an initiative called Children Count 2, which is the first time they've ever focused their energy and time and effort to reach out to try and make sure young children are included in the census. And, well, let me stop there.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. O'Hare. What I'll do now is open it up for questions for anybody from the participants. So if you would like to ask a question, I remind you to press number sign and 6 to unmute your line.
Really? If you do, I'm going to ask if you can please come up so I can. Okay, so. Hi, Oscar. This is Sandy from the California Community Foundation. We're going to have one of our LAPAI grantees ask a question. Diane, if you can.
Great.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, this is Diane Ujia with API's CAN Asian Pacific Islanders California Action Network. So as you know, we are faced with multiple languages and multiple degrees of understanding about what the census entails. One of the key factors, and I know that some of your material addresses it, but one of the key factors is fear of being reported to the INS, and I know that some of our other communities share that fear. How can we overcome that beyond just what's written? I know it says the information will be confidential, but we have to go a little bit beyond that. There have been cases where a lot of our families have been well, anyways, I'll just leave it there.
Sure. No, it's a great question, and you're not obviously the first or the only one to have that kind of interest or concern. That, in fact, my suspicion is the biggest single challenge that the Census Bureau has is convincing people, particularly in the immigrant community, particularly in the post-9/11 environment, that this is safe. And there's a couple things I would suggest, I guess. First of all, that I'm pretty sure that hearing something from the Washington, D.C. or Census Bureau people isn't going to mean much to the people in that situation. So I think it really has to come from a local, trusted voice. The second thing I would add is to mention to people that the census form does not ask Social Security number, does not ask income, it does not ask citizenship, it does not ask about legal status. So many of the kinds of things that people might be reluctant to give out are not what the Census Bureau asks. In fact, while I'm on that, I'll just mention there's only 5 demographic characteristics that are asked. That's age, gender, race, Hispanic origin, and the relationship to householder. So those are the only things that are being asked on the census this time around. The third thing that is perhaps a little more difficult, but I think the Bureau, I know the Bureau has a very good record in terms of its confidentiality. There was some problems in World War II. I'm not aware of anything since then, and I think that I know the Bureau takes a great deal of pride and an interest in maintaining a reputation for treating stuff confidentially. So. So those are the 3 things I guess I would suggest, and I know it's going to be a tough sell in many places.
Thank you. Another question? And just to remind you, if you're muted, you will have to unmute your line, the number sign and 6.
Let me just mention, Oscar, one thing I should have said earlier, I guess, while we got a minute here, that one of the problems, difficulties for local groups, especially nonprofit groups, is not having the money available to reproduce materials or something like that. And I do know that it hasn't been widely advertised, but some of the regional Census Bureau directors have money to help groups do that. So if that's an issue that your group is facing, I would try and reach the local partnership specialist and the local census office can put you in touch with them and then see if there isn't some money available from the Regional Census Bureau's Director's Office to help you reproduce materials or do other things that might be needed that are really low cost, but people groups just don't have the money for.
Great. Any other questions?
I have a question. Are we on?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any recommendations that you have or perhaps on the census site of best practices related to either advocacy or outreach that's been done at the community level that you're aware of?
Not much. I mean, there's a list of things. Let me back up. If you go on the partnership, Bureau has a place to join up as a partner. On there are a list of things that can be done. I think that list is probably about as good as we have. The issue raises a good one that even though people have been doing this for in 2000 and 2009 and 10, we really don't have a very good sense of what's working and what's not. So I think common sense is probably as good a guide as anything in this area.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The housing foreclosure crisis has resulted in a number of families being displaced, and they're living in places that they're not supposed to be living.
Mm-hmm.
And although, again, the material speaks to that in terms of confidence, I think some folks don't think that they should fill out the form because it's temporary. They're only staying with their cousin for a short period of time, so they're not going to fill out this form. What do we do to overcome those who are in transition?
Well, there's two issues you kind of raised there. One is fear of living someplace where you're not supposed to be living, and I know this came up in 2000 quite often when grandparents would have grandchildren with them and they weren't supposed to have children in their housing complex or whatever. I go back to the thing we covered a little bit earlier, that the Bureau has a very strong pledge of confidentiality. They do not share this information with housing authorities or any local government. I know that's true, but I'm not sure how well you can convince people of it. And the other is on the temporary nature of places, is to tell folks that if they don't have a usual place of residence, which is the common term used by the census, then they should be counted wherever they are on April 1st. So if they don't have any place else to live and they're staying with their cousin on April 1st, that's where they should be counted. My suggestion would be for people, if they're in doubt, to go ahead and fill it out, that we know some people are going to be missed. I think I'd rather have them err on the side of making sure they're included than take a chance on being missed. And I would remind folks that, you know, this is money for their community, that on a per capita basis, if you take all the $447 billion given out divided by the 300 and some million people in the population, it's about $1,500 per person. So I'm not sure it's fair to use that number exactly, but the point is, if people are not counted, it's going to cost their community thousands of dollars over the next 10 years.
Great. Any additional questions?
I have a question. This is Vanessa from the Tongan Community Center. I was wondering how the census is reaching out to families that, another hard-to-reach place, families that are living in motels or hotels.
If there are a hotel or motel where there's a homeless center or someone that used that place where people can stay when they're homeless, then those have been tried to be captured by the Census Bureau, and they will make sure that they will go out to visit those folks. On a rental basis, the Bureau will go into places like that, shelters and motels and different places like that, that they've identified that to see if people have been counted or not. The dilemma is some of the people are living places that they don't know about. So I guess let me back up and kind of go just a little bit different. If you find people who don't think they've been counted or may not have been counted, the Bureau is going to open about 30 or 40,000 sites around the country called Be Counted areas. And in those are going to be questionnaires that they can fill out and send in, and the Bureau will take that and see if they've been counted somewhere else, and if not, we'll add them into the population. So if people are unsure about whether they've been counted or not, or think they have not been counted because of the situation you just talked about, then I would urge them to go to one of those Be Counted sites and pick up a questionnaire and send it in.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Well, we don't have any additional questions, I would like to thank everybody for attending the call. I would also like to inform you about a toolkit that Families in Schools developed, specifically in mind looking at the undercounted children 0 to 5. With the generous support from the California Community Foundation, Families in Schools developed a toolkit to be able to be used by early care and preschool providers on how to be able to outreach to parents of children 0 to 5 and to make sure that they participate in the census and that they count their children. The toolkit has different resources, but in particular there were 3 pieces that were developed by Families in Schools. One is a guide for providers on 10 things that they can do at their site in order to be able to encourage their parents to participate in the census. The second one was develop lesson plans, 2 lesson plans that they can use with children to talk to them about the census. The lesson plans are really focused on counting, and they have different activities, and some of them can be used in also with counting books. But the lesson plans are aimed to be able to help those educators, those providers, be able to work with children and talk to them about counting and about the census. And the third part of that toolkit is a brochure that we developed specifically for parents of children 0 to 5 so they could understand how does participating in the census help their children, especially in the area of early education. We invite you to look at the material. We've already sent in your confirmation email today in the morning. We have the web address where you can find the information. But if you haven't received it, we'll send it again. But the web address is www.educationadvocacy.wordpress.com. So if you register for today's call, you'll be receiving an email thanking you for your participation, and with all the links where you can download the research developed written by Bill O'Hare, and also the link to the website where you can download the toolkit. If you would like to get copies of the toolkit, you can write to us, contact me personally, and we'll be able to mail you a toolkit. And the toolkit will include 50 copies of brochures in different languages, which will be in English, Spanish, Chinese, or Korean, along with some posters that we obtain also from NALEO, which are also doing a lot of census outreach, along with the census lesson plans and the guide for providers, along with some other additional resources such as a coloring book that was developed by the Census Bureau. So if you have any more questions or you would like more information about the toolkit, please you can reach me at ocruz@familiesinschools.org. So once again, thank you for your participation.